Contents of First King. Solomon becomes king. Chapters 1, 2 to 46. The record of First Kings opens with David near death as he draws close to the conclusion of his reign of 40 years. His son, Adonijah, will, with the help of Joab, the army chief, and Abiathar, the priest, conspires to take over the kingship. The prophet Nathan informs David of this and indirectly reminds him that he has already designated Solomon to be king at his death. David therefore has Zadok the priest anoint Solomon as king. Even while the conspirators are celebrating Adonijah's succession, David now charges Solomon to be strong and prove himself a man and walk in the ways of Jehovah his God. After which David dies and is buried in the city of David. 2:10. In time, Solomon banishes Abiathar and executes the troublemakers, Adonijah and Joab. Later, Shimei is executed when he does not show respect for the merciful provision made to spare his life. The kingdom is now firmly established in the hands of Solomon. Solomon's wise rule. Chapters 3, 4 to 34. Solomon forms a marriage alliance with Egypt by marrying Pharaoh's daughter. He prays to Jehovah for an obedient heart in order to judge Jehovah's people with discernment. Because he does not request long life or riches, Jehovah promises to give him a wise and discerning heart, and also riches and glory. Early in his reign, Solomon shows his wisdom when two women appeared before him claiming the same child. Solomon orders his men to sever the living child in two, and to give half to each woman. 325. At this, the real mother pleads for the child's life, saying the other woman should have it. Solomon thus identifies the rightful mother, and she gets the child. Because of Solomon's God-given wisdom, all Israel prospers and is happy and secure. People from many lands come to hear his wise sayings. Solomon's Temple, chapters 5, 1 through 10, 29. Solomon recalls Jehovah's words to his father David. Your son whom I shall put upon your throne is in place of you. He is the one that will build the house to my name. 5:5. Solomon therefore makes preparation for this. Hiram, the king of Tyre, assists by sending cedar and juniper logs from Lebanon and by providing skilled workers. These, together with Solomon, conscripted workers, start work on the house of Jehovah in the fourth year of Solomon's reign. In the 480th year after the Israelites left Egypt, 6:1, no hammer, axes, or any tools of iron are used at the building site, as all the stones are prepared and fitted at the quarry before being brought to the temple site for assembly. The entire interior of the temple, first covered with cedar on the walls and juniper wood on the floor, is then beautifully overlaid with gold. Two figures of cherubs are made of oil tree wood, each 10 cubits, 14.6 feet, high and 10 cubits from wingtip to wingtip, and these are placed in the innermost room. Other cherubs, along with the palm tree figures and blossoms, are engraved on the temple walls. At last, after more than 7 years of work, the magnificent temple is completed. Solomon continues his building program. A house for himself, the house of the forest of Lebanon, the porch of pillars, the porch of the throne, and the house for Pharaoh's daughter. He also makes two great copper pillars for the porch of Jehovah's house, the molten sea for the court, and the copper carriages, as well as copper basins and golden utensils. Now the time comes for the priests to bring up the ark of Jehovah's covenant and to place it in the innermost room, the most holy, under the wings of the cherubs. As the priests come out, the glory of Jehovah fills the house of Jehovah, so that the priest can no longer stand and minister. 8:11. Solomon blesses the congregation of Israel, and he blesses and praises Jehovah. On bended knees and with his palms spread out to the heavens, he prayerfully acknowledges that the heaven of the heavens cannot contain Jehovah, much less this earthly house he has built. He prays that Jehovah will hear all those fearing him as they pray toward this house, yes, even the foreigner from a distant land, in order that all the peoples of the earth may get to know your name, so as to fear you the same as your people Israel do. During the 14th year feast that follows, Solomon sacrifices 22,000 cattle and 120,000 sheep. Job tells Solomon that he has heard his prayer and that he has sanctified the temple by putting his name there to time indefinite. Now Solomon will walk in uprightness before Jehovah. The throne of his kingdom will continue. However, if Solomon and his sons after him leave Jehovah's worship and serve other gods, then says Jehovah, I will cut Israel off from upon the surface of the ground that I have given them, and the house that I have sanctified to my name I shall throw away from before me, and Israel will indeed become a proverbial saying and a taunt among all the peoples, and this house itself will become heaps of ruin. 9 verse 3, 7, and 8. It has taken Solomon 20 years to complete the two houses, the house of Jehovah and the house of the king. Now he proceeds to build many cities throughout his domain, as well as ships for use in trading with distant lands. The queen of Sheba thus hears of the great wisdom that Jehovah has given Solomon, and she comes to test him with perplexing questions. After hearing him and seeing the prosperity and happiness of his people, she exclaims, I had not been told the half. 10:7. As Jehovah continues to show love to Israel, Solomon becomes greater in riches and wisdom than all the other kings of the earth. 10:23. Solomon's unfaithfulness and death. Chapter 11. Contrary to Jehovah's command, Solomon takes many wives from other nations, 700 wives and 300 concubines. Deuteronomy 17:17. His heart is drawn away to serve other gods. Jehovah tells him that the kingdom will be ripped away before him, not in his day, but in the day of his son. Nevertheless, a part of the kingdom, one tribe in addition to Judah, will be ruled over by Solomon's sons. God begins to raise up resistors to Solomon in nearby nations, and Jeroboam of the tribe of Ephraim also lifts himself up against the king. Ahijah the prophet tells Jeroboam that he will become king over 10 tribes of Israel, and Jeroboam flees for his life to Egypt. Solomon dies after reigning for 40 years, and his son Rehoboam becomes king in the year 997 BCE. The kingdom divided. Chapters 12 to 14. Jeroboam returns from Egypt and goes up with the people to ask Rehoboam for relief from all the burdens that Solomon had placed upon them. Listening to young men instead of to the wise counsel of the elders in Israel, Rehoboam increases the hardship. Israel rises in revolt and makes Jeroboam king over the northern 10 tribes. Rehoboam, left with only Judah and Benjamin, gathers any army to fight the rebels, but at Jehovah's command he turns back. Jeroboam builds Shechem as his capital, but he still feels insecure. He fears that the people will return to Jerusalem to worship Jehovah and that they will come under Rehoboam again. To prevent this, he sets up two golden calves, one in Dan and one in Bethel. And to direct the worship, he selects priests, not from the tribe of Levi, but from among the people in general. While Jeroboam is sacrificing at the altar in Bethel, Jehovah sends a prophet to warn him that he will raise up a king from David's line, named Josiah, who will take strong action against this altar of false worship. As a portent, the altar then and there ripped apart. The prophet himself is later killed by a lion for disobeying Jehovah's instruction not to eat or drink while on his mission. Adversity now begins to plague Jeroboam's house. His child dies as a judgment from Jehovah, and God's prophet Ahijah foretells that Jeroboam's house will be cut off completely because of his great sin in setting up false gods in Israel. After reigning 22 years, Jeroboam dies and his son Nadab becomes king in his place. In Judah, Rehoboam, Abijah, and Asa, chapters 14 to 15, 24. Meanwhile, under Rehoboam, Judah is also doing what is bad in Jehovah's eyes, practicing idol making, idol worship. The king of Egypt invades and carries off many of the temple treasures. After ruling 17 years, Rehoboam dies, and his son Abijam becomes king. He also keeps sinning against Jehovah, and he dies after a 3-year reign. Asa, his son, now rules, and in contrast serves Jehovah with a complete heart, and removes the dungy idols out of the land. There is a constant warfare between Israel and Judah. Asa obtains help from Syria, and Israel is forced to withdraw. Asa rules for 41 years and is succeeded by his son Jehoshaphat. In Israel, Nadab, Baasha, Elah, Zimri, Tibni, Omri, and Ahab, chapters 15 and 25 to chapters 16 and 34. What a wicked crowd. Baasha assassinates Nadab after he has reigned only 2 years and follows through by annihilating the entire house of Jeroboam. He continues in false worship and in fighting with Judah. Jehovah foretells that he will make a clean sweep of Baasha's house, as he has done with Jeroboam's. After Baasha's 24-year reign, he is succeeded by his son Elah, who is assassinated 2 years later by his servant Zimri. As soon as he takes the throne, Zimri strikes down all the house of Baasha. When the people hear of it, they make Omri the chief of the army king and come up against Tirzah, Zimri's capital. When he sees that all is lost, Zimri burns the king's house over himself so that he dies. Now Tibni tries to reign as a rival king, but after a time the followers of Omri overpower him and kill him. Omri buys the mountain of Samaria and builds there the city of Samaria. He goes walking in all the ways of Jeroboam, offending Jehovah with idol worship. In fact, he is worse than all the others before him. After reigning 12 years, he dies, and Ahab his son becomes king. Ahab marries Jezebel, the daughter of the king of Sidon, and he then sets up an altar to Baal in Samaria. He exceeds in wicked all those who have preceded him. It is at this time that Heel and Bethelite rebuilds the city of Jericho at the cost of the life of his firstborn son and his youngest son. True worship is at its lowest ebb. Elijah, prophetic work in Israel, chapter 17 to chapters 22, verse 40. Suddenly a messenger from Jehovah appears on the scene. It is Elijah the Tishbite. Startling indeed is his opening pronouncement to King Ahab. As Jehovah the God of Israel, before whom I do stand is living, there will occur during these years neither dew nor rain, except at the order of my word. 17:1. Just as suddenly Elijah retires at Jehovah's direction to the valley east of the Jordan. There is drought in Israel, but ravens bring food to Elijah. When the valley streams dry up, Jehovah sends his prophet to dwell in Zarephath in Sidon. Because of a widow's kindness to Elijah, Jehovah miraculously maintains her small supply of flour and oil, so that she and her son do not die of hunger. Later, the son becomes sick and dies, but at Elisha's plea, Jehovah restores the child's life. Then, in the 3rd year of the drought, Jehovah sends Elijah to Ahab again. Ahab accuses Elijah of bringing ostracism on Israel, but Elijah boldly tells Ahab, "You, the house of your father, have because of following the Baals." Chapters 18, verse 18. Elijah calls on Ahab to assemble all prophets of Baal at Mount Carmel. No longer will it be possible to limp upon two opinions. The issue is drawn: Jehovah versus Baal. Before all the people, the 450 priests of Baal prepare a bull, set it on wood on the altar, and pray for fire to come down and consume the offering. From morning to noon, they call in vain on Baal, amid taunts from Elijah. They scream and cut themselves, but no answer. Next, the lone prophet, Elijah, builds an altar in the name of Jehovah and prepares the wood and bull for a sacrifice. He has the people soak the offering and the wood 3 times with water, and then he prays to Jehovah. "Answer me, O Jehovah, answer me, that this people may know that you, Jehovah, are the true God." At that, fire flashes from heaven, consuming the offering, the wood, the altar stones, the dust, and the water. When all the people see it, they immediately fall upon their faces and say, Jehovah is the true God. Jehovah is the true God. Chapters 18, verse 37 and 39. Death to the prophets of Baal, Elijah personally takes care of the slain, so that not one escapes. Then Jehovah gives rain, ending the drought in Israel. When the news of Baal's humiliation reaches Jezebel, she seeks to have Elijah killed. Out of fear, he flees with his attendants to the wilderness, and Jehovah directs him to Horeb. Jehovah there appears to him, no, not spectacularly in a wind or a quaking of a fire, but with a calm, low voice. 19:11 and 12. Jehovah tells him to anoint Hazael as king of Syria, Jehu as king of over Israel, and Elisha as prophet in his place. He comforts Elijah with the news that 7,000 in Israel have not been down to Baal. Elijah proceeds straight away to anoint Elisha by throwing his official garment upon him. Ahab now wins two victories over the Syrians, but is rebuked by Jehovah for making a covenant with their king instead of killing him. Then comes the affair of Naboth, whose vineyard Ahab covets. Jezebel has Naboth framed for false witnesses by false witnesses and put to death so that Ahab can take the vineyard. What an unforgivable crime. Again, Elijah appears. He tells Ahab that where Naboth has died, dogs will lick up his blood also, and that his house will be exterminated as completely as those of Jeroboam and Baasha. Dogs will eat up Jezebel in the plot of land of Jezreel. Without exception, no one has proved to be like Ahab, who sold himself to do what was bad in the eyes of Jehovah, whom Jezebel his wife edged on. 21:25. However, because Ahab humbles himself on hearing Elijah's words, Jehovah says that the calamity will not come in his days, but in the days of his son. Ahab now teams up with Jehoshaphat, the king of Judah, in the fight against Syria, and contrary to the advice of Jehovah's prophet Micaiah, they go out to battle. Ahab dies of wounds received in battle. As his chariot is washed down at the pool of Samaria, dogs lick up his blood, just as Elijah prophesied. Ahaziah, his son, becomes king of Israel in his place. Jehoshaphat reigns in Judah. Chapters 22:41 to 53. Jehoshaphat, who accompanied Ahab to the battle with Syria, is faithful to Jehovah like Asa his father, but he fails to clear out entirely the high places of false worship. After ruling for 25 years, he dies, and Jehoram, his son, becomes king. To the north in Israel, Ahaziah follows in his father's footsteps, offending Jehovah by his Baal worship.